Hello, Facebook. I'm Evan Dashevsky, features editor with PCMag.com. Welcome to The Convo. This is the Facebook Live series where we talk to the most interesting and boldest minds in technology, science, and geekdom. And today we're going to be talking about sex, or more particular about how it might not be necessary in 20 years, or at least not the baby-making kind. So my guest today is Henry T. Greely, the director of the Center for Law and the Biosciences at Stanford University. Now, his new book is The End of Sex, about how technologies will give people the option to procreate in the lab and actually choose the characteristics they want to pass on. So Professor Greely, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, now your book is called The End of Sex, and I'm sure a lot of people are kind of freaking out at home right now. So let's just put them at ease. You're not saying the end of recreational sex. That, as far as you can see for the foreseeable future, that's safe.
You know, we'll continue to be boys and girls for the most part. Mm-hmm. We'll continue to reproduce sexually, and the two half genomes will come together to make a whole genome. And we'll continue to do what you, me, or Bill Clinton thinks of as sex.
Oh,
that's not going to change.
Perfect.
We'll
change is the fun stuff is still on. Yeah.
Okay. We'll change using sex to make babies. We'll do a lot less of that.
All right, we're going to jump into that. So for people who aren't familiar with your book, maybe just give the elevator pitch of the technologies you think will be changing the way we do things.
Sure. I think within 20 to 40 years, most babies in countries that have good health systems will be conceived using what I call easy PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. People will make eggs from skin cells using a process called induced pluripotent stem cells, where you turn skin cells into stem cells and the stem cells into eggs, or sperm if you need to. They'll then make embryos, maybe 100 embryos. Each of those embryos will get its whole genome tested, because whole genome sequencing is cheap and is getting cheaper. And then the parents will be asked, which one of the 100 do you want to move to try to make a baby? Here's what we can tell you about. Here are the genetic traits we can tell you about these embryos. You tell us which one you want.
Now, and also I forgot to mention, we want you to join us at home. Drop any questions you have in the comments. Social Pete will read them out later in the show. So if you want to talk about genetics, about where this is all going, or anything else in the bioethical realm, please join that in. Now, you're talking about using skin cells to reproduce, so we won't even need sperm and eggs. So how far, I think a lot of people are going to ask, are we from having same-sex couples be able to have offspring?
So that's one more jump, but I don't think it's all that big a jump. If you can take skin cells from a guy and turn them into sperm, I already know scientists who are thinking about ways to turn them into eggs. Similarly, skin cells from women, if you can turn them into eggs, turn them into sperm. The trickiest part will be making sperm from women that can make boys. You'll need to add a Y chromosome. But everything else you could do without adding or editing genes. So I think that's maybe 5 or 10 years past gay easy PGD is like 5 or 10 years past straight easy PGD.
Wow. Now this field is actually moving very fast. Now, I heard you in an interview that there was something called CRISPR, which kind of blew up as you were writing the book, and you were forced to revise a great deal of your book because of this technology. Well, first, what is CRISPR, and how much of your book did you have to change?
So CRISPR is clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, which means nothing to anybody. But it's a really, really impressive way to edit DNA. It's stuff we could do before, but this makes it 10 to 100 times cheaper, faster, easier, and more accurate. What it did to the book is, what I'm arguing about in the book is embryo selection. Two people make a bunch of embryos, and they pick the one they want. But two people with blue eyes are not going to get a brown-eyed kid. It doesn't work that way. If, on the other hand, you can edit and change the DNA, two people with blue eyes could have a brown-eyed kid. I think embryo editing is another 10 or 20 years farther off than embryo selection because there are additional risks added by the editing process. But I had to write a lot more about it than I expected to, thanks to the wonderful scientists who invented CRISPR.
Very cool. Facebook, I see you have a question. What you got?
Someone is just wondering, how can they get your book, and is it out now?
I did not pay the person to ask that question. I want that note. It is out now. It's published by Harvard University Press. get it is Amazon, Barnes & Noble, one of the internet sellers. I don't think it's in a lot of bookstores, unfortunately, but it's available. It's also available on Kindle.
Very cool. Now, if I'm remembering my high school biology classes correctly, which was quite a bit, it was a while ago, they said that like a population is most healthy when it has the most diversity. Now, if we're going to be selecting out different traits, be it dangerous diseases, or be it shortness, baldness, or asthma, or things like that, do we run the risk of having a less healthy population because we have less diversity?
Yes, we run a risk. It's a risk more of having a less healthy population in changed circumstances, but the environments change all the time. I mean, for example, if we eliminated sickle cell disease, we would eliminate for people who live in countries with a lot of malaria, but without good medicine. It turns out having one copy of the sickle cell gene protects you against malaria. Having two copies without medicine kills you from sickle cell anemia. If we didn't know that, we eliminated the sickle cell gene variations, and then malaria made a huge comeback, that would be a problem for our species. So it's an issue we need to watch and to pay attention to. On the other hand, there's 7.4 billion of us right now. For most of humans' history, we've been numbered in the small number, single-digit millions. There's a lot of diversity out there. It'll be a long time before easy PGD makes it go away.
Gotcha. Facebook, what you got?
What are some of the other negative effects that switching just to designer babies would cause?
So first, this may sound pedantic, but I don't think it is. I'm not talking about designer babies. CRISPR, edited babies would be designer. You pick exactly what you want. This is two people make 100 embryos. All those embryos have are what the two people had to give. So they're selecting 100 of their possible options. I think the biggest things I worry about are first, safety. Are you going to end up with babies who are harmed? Because it turns out making eggs from skin cells wasn't such a good idea, but it took us too long to figure it out. Second, coercion. Will governments or insurers or mothers-in-law or fathers-in-law force people to use this or to make certain selections? And I don't think that would be a bad idea. And the third really big one is fairness, equality. I don't think that'll be a problem in rich countries. I think this will be available to everybody. It'll be free because it saves a lot of public health dollars. Insurers will like it, but it'll be a long time before people in Central African Republic or Laos get it. And even in the US, there'll be people who won't want it. There are also issues about people selecting too many boys and too few girls. And I think for me, the hardest are the effects on people with genetic disabilities of a world where no one else like them is being born. The psychological effects, the effects on research, medical, social support, those are the issues I think are most important. But the whole last third of the book is about things we should worry about.
Now, Facebook, I see you have another question.
Should there be legal limits on what you can change in an embryo?
So again, the change in an embryo is gene editing. The book is mainly about embryo selection, but the question I think can apply to both. There aren't limits now. Whether there should be limits is a really good question, and I think different countries and different individuals in different countries will answer it different ways. I think of 5 things this could tell you about really nasty, serious childhood diseases like Tay-Sachs disease or trisomy 13, really bad stuff. Each one of those is rare, but there's 6,000 to 8,000 such diseases, and they add up to about 1% to 2% of babies born. I think the main reason people will do that is to avoid that risk. Second is other diseases, Alzheimer's risk, breast cancer risk, colon cancer risk. A third is cosmetics, from hair color, eye color, skin color, to male pattern baldness, to early white hair, which of course is a positive trait because the silverback gorillas rule the bands for a reason. Behavioral stuff, math ability, science ability, personality, music, sports. We're not going to be very good at it, I don't think. Maybe able to say this embryo has a 60% chance of being in the top half, but some people want to use that and some won't. And then boy or girl. I can certainly imagine countries saying you can use it for serious diseases but nothing else. or countries saying you can't use it, you can use it for anything except boy or girl. I could see lots of different possibilities. My book actually isn't aimed at telling people what we should do. It's giving them enough information to help them make up their minds, both personally and for their countries and cultures, as to what limits they should put on it. Right now, however, in the US at least, it's unlimited.
Mm-hmm. Now, and we should also clarify that you're actually a professor of law, not a biologist by trade. And
right, my last bio class was in 10th grade.
Mm-hmm. And so now, how does this technology, just to clarify for the audience, so we have IVF treatments now, which allow people to kind of do some of the things you're talking about. So the technology you're talking about just makes it easier and cheaper. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, it's funny. I tried to crowdsource a name for my technology, and I got all sorts of possibilities, none of which I like. So I just ended up calling it Easy PGD. Uh-huh. PGD, or pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, is where you take a couple of cells off an early embryo, mm-hmm. and you do a genetic test on them, and you decide, well, do I like this embryo, or will it grow up to be somebody with a really terrible disease? Mm-hmm. That's actually been around for 25 years. Yeah. Last year in the U.S., 8,000 babies were born after having one or two cells of their embryos plucked off and tested. And the good news is none of them was born without an arm or a leg or another body part. The other cells make up for it. Mm-hmm. What's going to change is to do PGD, you have to do IVF, because to grab cells from an embryo, you have to have the embryo. Mm-hmm. If you get pregnant in bed, a 3 to 5 day old embryo is halfway down a fallopian tube. Mm-hmm. Good luck finding it. You do it through IVF, it's in the Petri dish, you left it in, they do not crawl around and change dishes and so on. Mm-hmm. So you have to use IVF, and IVF is expensive, unpleasant, and risky. Mm-hmm. The unpleasant and risky is for the woman, not the man. Life's unfair, but egg harvest is a real pain. Mm-hmm. If you can make eggs from skin cells, you eliminate 90% of the cost of IVF and 100% of the discomfort and the risk. Mm-hmm. So that's I think is what's going to change. We'll be able to make eggs from skin cells, which makes IVF a lot easier, which in turn makes PGD a lot easier. And with cheap whole genome sequencing, we'll be able to learn not just one or two genetic traits about an embryo, which is what we do now. Mm-hmm. We'll be able to learn everything genetics can tell us.
Cool. Now, and also just to talk about the economics of it, now you still think that these procedures will be somewhat expensive, but it'll be in a rich nation's interest to actually give them out for free, because in the long run, the country will save money from serious illnesses that would otherwise be left to treat.
Yeah, and not just in the long run, even in the relatively short run. Mm-hmm. Healthcare costs are impossible to figure out even today. Mm-hmm. So to try to predict them 30 years in advance, I am certifiably insane, but I did it anyway. And let's say, and I think this is a plausible number, mm-hmm. let's say that in 30 years it costs $10,000 today dollars to make a baby mm-hmm. using Easy PGD. 100 babies is $1 million. How many really sick babies' births do you have to prevent in order to save $1 million? Mm-hmm. And the answer is about 0.2. And instead you'll be preventing 1 or 2 out of 100 having one of these really serious immediate diseases, mm-hmm. let alone the reduction in burden from cancers and Alzheimer's and other later in life diseases. Mm-hmm. But I think the rate of return for a healthcare system of this is going to be enormous. It'll be interesting to see the political interplay from people who want healthcare to be cheaper, mm-hmm. to people who are also concerned about embryos. Those two groups sometimes overlap. Which way will Republican legislators jump when it comes to a choice between money and embryos? Mm-hmm. It'll be fun to watch.
Definitely. Facebook, I see you have some questions.
Do you think that giving people the ability to sort of engineer babies would over time create like a larger gap between the rich and the poor, because not everyone would have access to these technologies?
So, great question, and something I talk about in some detail in the book. First, remember, I'm not talking about engineering, I'm talking about selection, although there's still some of the same issues. But right now, we're not talking about a speciation event. We're not talking about making X-Men or Superman, because we have not a clue what the genes are to make Superman. Mm-hmm. We know a lot about genes that affect intelligence, but they're all genes that when messed up give you extremely low intelligence. Mm-hmm. We don't know squat about average or above average intelligence. So the babies made this way, the babies selected this way, aren't going to be super babies, but they'll be, I don't know, 10 to 20% healthier than other kids. Mm-hmm. Rich kids are already 10 to 20% healthier than other kids. I think it's a problem to add that. And I think we need to worry about making sure that everybody has access to it. But having said that, I can imagine that easily in the U.S. I think it'll happen. Mm-hmm. But in Central African Republic or Laos or Paraguay, there are going to be international disparities with respect to this, just as there already are with respect to healthcare more generally. Mm-hmm. And those are problems.
I would say a lot of the connection a lot of people might jump to is this sounds, like not Nazi eugenics. Is that a fair connection to make, or would you dispute that?
I would dispute that, mm-hmm. But part of the problem is eugenics now means so much that all it really means is, I don't like this. Mm-hmm. People say eugenics, and the one thing they mean is it's something bad.
Right.
What the Nazis did was using bad genetics, sterilize, and then later kill. And by the way, it wasn't just the Nazis. California sterilized 30,000 people involuntarily. Mm-hmm. Nazi law was taken from California's. Mm-hmm. They sterilized and then killed people to keep them from having babies. What this offers is parents the choice of which embryo they want to try to make decisions about the healthiness of their babies, and also maybe things like hair color, eye color, skin color, boy and girl. It's eugenics in the sense that people are making choices, but it's not about sterilization, and it's not about the government forcing you to do something, at least not if it plays out the way I think it should. Mm-hmm. It's empowering parents to try to have kids that they want and kids that will be healthy.
Facebook, I see you have some questions.
If a viewer who wants to know, can we be designed to be more empathetic or nicer?
Well, genetically, not yet. We have no clue what that is. Maybe if we study the Canadian genomes more closely, we could figure out the niceness gene.
Fair enough.
But we don't know it. We do know some things about how to make people nicer, and that is to raise them in a nice way, to not yell at them, hit them, be nasty to them as little kids. Mm-hmm. But the genetics of niceness, there will undoubtedly be some genetic connections to those kinds of personality traits. Figuring them out is going to be really hard. They'll be complicated, as is true of anything involving the brain, because it's not just the thousands of genes, it's also all of your experiences. Mm-hmm. So I'd give this one a definite maybe.
Okay.
But not soon.
How could this technology be used with, say, animals? I mean, could this affect our food chain and create super burgers?
Sure.
Yeah.
We actually kind of do it already, mm-hmm. Not quite to the same extent, but lots and lots of livestock is created by artificial insemination, mm-hmm. using frozen sperm from the best bulls and the best rams and so on. I think this does have the possibility to improve, to get more of what we want, or more of what the producers want. That's not necessarily more of what you and I want. Think about tomatoes. But there, I think CRISPR is the real game changer, the gene editing, where we'll be able to add traits that don't currently exist. This isn't a food issue per se, but I suspect within 20 years somebody's going to make a unicorn.
Okay.
Probably a Silicon Valley billionaire with a 12-year-old daughter will take genes for a horn and add them to a horse. But you could imagine that with all sorts of agricultural and livestock applications. We're less likely to do that with humans because we don't care as much about dead colts as we do about dead babies.
Right.
But so the non-human applications of gene editing in agriculture and elsewhere are coming on like gangbusters.
Cool. Facebook, I see you have some questions.
One last one from the audience. Is curing a disease before it happens in an embryo without their consent ethical? Normally people can't be treated until they give a consent to the doctor or hospital.
Yeah, so that's one of the really interesting, deep philosophical questions about this. Is it ethical to do something to an embryo before the embryo consents? Well, the embryo can't consent. And frankly, when I was an embryo, I don't remember giving consent to be born or to be born to the parents I was born to. I got lucky, but I didn't get to make a choice. To be a little more pragmatic, typically we let parents make health decisions and medical decisions for their kids up to a point. Mm-hmm. Once the kids become teenagers or old enough to really have good reasons, we give them usually a veto. But with a 2-year-old, it's the parent who makes the decision about the health issues. And I think if you, for this purpose, think about the embryos as being under the control of the parents, the consent issue becomes less serious. It doesn't go away entirely. I think we need to be really careful about the safety here. If we do something to me to try to treat a disease, give me gene therapy, and it goes badly wrong, I agreed, I consented to it, I've had a good run. I hope some people would be sad, but it's not a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
If you do something that causes a baby to be born with a real serious disability, I think that deserves at least the 8th level of Dante's Inferno.
Very cool. So the other thing I'm just like, it just kind of popped into my mind is that if you could use skin cells to create a sperm or an egg, it might be really easy to have someone contribute to your baby against their will, because it's pretty easy to just grab a cup that they had or really just rush up against them to get those skin cells, right?
Yep. I think one of the clearest thing we'll need is laws against making people parents without their knowledge or consent.
What would that
Right
crime
now-
be called?
Huh?
What would that crime be called?
Forcible parenthood.
Wrongful parenthood.
Wrongful parenthood?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's
Okay.
a good question. But right now, you can, in theory, steal eggs and sperm, but it's pretty tricky to steal eggs and sperm. But we leave our cells everywhere we go. Every water bottle we drink has cells on it. Every desk we touch has our skin cells on it. And so I think this is a real possibility.
Weird. Okay, now I just don't get to talk to a bioethicist that often, so I just got to throw out a few last questions.
Sure.
Do you have an opinion on GMOs? This is kind of actually what we're talking about, but with plants. That there's some people who are really scared with them, though I don't know if the science is there to back that up. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think almost all of the anti-GMO sentiment is not at all supported by science. Mm-hmm. The science of GMOs is much stronger and safer than the science of anything else we eat. Mm-hmm. We don't test new strains of corn for whether they're safe and effective, but if they're made by GMO, we do test them for safety. So I'm a big fan of GMOs, and I think, frankly, as the climate continues to change, we're going to need to be able to make crops that can deal better with drought or with cold or with heat or with salt in the water. I think GMOs may be the only way we're going to be able to feed the planet in the coming decades, and I hope they become more popular.
So I'll tell that to the people in my Facebook feed. You know who you are. Okay, so and then the one last question I have to ask. Now you have access to all the secret labs at Stanford that they keep hidden in the basement. How close are we to a real-life Jurassic Park? You said that they could bring back a unicorn. When are we going to see a dinosaur?
First, I don't think we're bringing back a unicorn. I don't remember any fossil unicorns.
We don't know.
But, yeah, fair point.
Yeah.
Fossil record scanty. In the sub basements of Stanford, we're not actually working on this. But one of the things I do work on is de-extinction. Mm-hmm. We're not going to have Jurassic Park because de-extinction, actually, there are plausible routes to it, but you've got to have the full genome sequence of the beast you want to bring back. Mm-hmm. The last dinosaur, not counting birds, which are kind of dinosaurs, 66.4 million years ago, that DNA, it seems impossible that we'll ever get that DNA. But Pleistocene Park, I think you're going to live to see woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, great ground sloths. I hope I live to see it. I think that's going to happen within the next 20 years or so.
Oh, very cool. Well, I mean, I'd love to talk to you for hours about that because that sounds amazing. But Hank Greely, thank you so much for joining us. The new book is The End of Sex, but it's not really the end of sex, just the end of the baby-making kind. I want to thank everyone for joining us on Facebook. Watch a lot of these because we have a lot more interviews and a lot of cool stuff. Give us a like, give us a share if you like this. And thank you to Social Pete. Thank you to everyone. And be good to each other. Peace.